Well, I think listening to the many interventions, I think that the major question is here that we have a new factor in international relations. The factor for the first time in modern history, the impulse to the growth, the economic growth, is not coming from Europe, but from Asia. And how we live or we cope with this novelty. I mean, it's something you have to meet and you have to cope with politically. And are the Europeans capable of doing this to face this new challenge? Europeans have their history, the example of their history. We have in the history of Europe many times in which the ranking of different countries has changed, and usually it was accompanied by war, by conflict. It did not go peacefully, the rise and the fall of different civilization countries. So how this, can we use in this changing world what I would call European logic? Yesterday I said, speaking about the European Union, how the European Union contains some values, some principle, and how can the European Union, or I use the word European Union, as rightly said Professor Gromyko, European Union is not Europe. We don't want to make the mistake of the Americans when they say America, they use for one part, for the whole of the continent. But inside the European Union, there are certain principles that can help in making this transition peaceful and stable. Now, I would emphasize three key words in this transition, which are democracy, law, multilateralism. All of them have also a particular European substance, although they are not exclusive European concepts. First of all, democracy, and we just heard the presentation of Professor Wei Zhang about democracy in China, and it's certainly very powerful, very convincing in many parts. But now, what is the relationship between modernization and democracy? Are they twin brothers? Can they be separated? Again, we have the history of Europe, which teaches a lot. We have modernization from above, usually, quite frequently successful, although you need a longer span of time to reflect on the long consequences of a modernization which is exclusively done from above. There are many comparisons, I read many times, comparisons, for instance, between China of today and Germany of the 19th century. There was also an authoritative society which grew very rapidly and at an astonishing pace, but then, of course, the political consequences came later on. So, I mean, in my view, it's not possible, and I disagree partially with what's said on that subject today, modernization without a certain degree of democracy. It's in the long run difficult. I'm not saying that democracy has to have the European stamp, the classical liberal democracy of our own tradition, but certain elements, free of speech, for instance, or political freedom, creation of different parties, of the different opinion inside the society, in the longer run are inevitable. It's not only the question, of course, of certain elements which are peculiar to the European culture. For instance, death penalty. We have death penalty in the United States, and I would not say that they are not a democracy. But those elements which I mentioned, in my view, are inevitable if, in the long run, we want to have a stable society and a society which is capable of a dialogue with the outside world. And we cannot, of course, ignore the enormous progress which have been made in China in terms of, for instance, personal freedoms. Well, freedom of movement around the country, it's a huge success and a great experiment, as I said yesterday. But still, in the long run, there will be contradiction in the end if this question of democracy will not be faced. For instance, they say even to keep together a huge country like China, with all the differences, you can use a very rigid system, or you can have a more flexible approach. Here, there is the example of the Soviet Union, which went through a terrible crisis after the end of communism, and maybe this is one reason why people in Beijing are more careful. But it is possible the coexistence of let's use the 5 stars, which in the China, in the flag, I think, represent the 5 major ethnic groups without a certain flexibility inside the structure of the country. So, I mean, this is what, of course, I don't think that democracy is something which can be imposed from outside, not democracy by arms. It's something which has to come to grow up from the society. And I'm confident that there in China, this gradualism, this need will come from the society itself and will bring to a larger basis for democracy in the years to come. Well, the second point is the law. Well, the law means that you have a minimum of juridical structure inside the country, which is inevitable in the relations with the outside world. I will quote only one judgment by a Chinese court concerning the Italian company Ferrero, which was suing for imitation of its products in China, and in fact, it was supported by the Chinese court. I mean, this, in my view, is a very important sign, a very important element of what should be the relations between the outside world and the countries, the rising countries, becoming now some of the new powers. And the third element, as I said, is multilateralism. We cannot think that it's understandable that a country rising now or find again the power, because there are old countries like Russia and China, that they could assert their nationalism, their interests, and they would be very assertive in doing things. But they have to understand that you need to be part of the larger structure, and here they have to contribute to the efficiency of this institution governing the international community. And I mentioned only the United Nations, for instance, which has to go to a certain revision. I think the subject was treated yesterday. Or the G8. I mean, the G8. What I would avoid, and I conclude, what I would avoid certainly is the creation of the so-called League of Democracy, which would create 2 fronts. I mean, this would be certainly a very damaging initiative. We have to put inside the existing big institution, G8, United Nations, the elements which could give to those institutions the power, the capability of mastering the new situations. Thank you.